afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Richard Talbot. I'm the Programme Leader for Comedy Writing and Performance here at the university for one more year, as the course is now being merged within other performance subjects, so you can take your comedy modules as part of a theatre and performance practice degree or a media and performance degree. So we're carrying on with the long tradition of comedy at Salford. And I'm really happy, I'm really pleased that as part of our Masterclass series, we're able to invite Ollie Horn here today. So welcome, Ollie.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me okay.
Sure we can, and we're looking forward to hearing all you have to say and all that you've brought with you. I'm first of all wanted to say that I feel really lucky to be in a position where I can go and see a comedian, or I can listen to a comedian on a podcast, and I can think, this person is fascinating, their work is fantastic, fascinating. I would love to share them, as a podcast listener, if you can imagine that you are sharing something that you listen to privately. So I'm sharing my love of Ollie's work with you, and I really hope, as most of you are working in some way as comedy writers or performers, that this is going to be really, really useful. And Ollie has joined us straight from Adelaide, is it? From Australia,
Yeah,
Perth and Adelaide?
I did this time I did Perth, Adelaide and Melbourne and Sydney. And then I flew back on Thursday. And I've already been gigging since, so this isn't my first gig back.
No signs of jet lag and no obstacles in the Middle East, just
straight through. Just straight through. They knew I was doing this. I think they they knew how important it was. And thanks so much. The context is I used to have a podcast, and my podcast co-host left the entertainment industry. That's why that podcast stopped. I might talk about this a little bit later on, but it's nice that sometimes you put things out into the world, you don't really know what the purpose of that thing is until a long way down the line. I think this is one of these very good examples where that was a passion project that we had no plans to commercialise. We did it because we were sincerely interested in the topic, and we were chatting about this stuff anyway. We thought, why not record it? And we haven't released an episode for about 4 years, but still people come and talk to me about it.
Which is great. One of the other reasons that it's important that you hear about Ollie's background is because of his sort of global interest. You're performing around the world. Yes, you've come back from the Adelaide Fringe, but you've been performing in Japan, Southeast Asia, Turkey, all over the place.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about how that happened, but the market for comedy is global, and I don't think we realise until we go abroad quite how much particularly British comedy is admired around the world. Like, just by being British, even if you're not funny, you already have a head start. And so the British are not very good at much these days, but still, the legacy of whether it's Monty Python or Mr. Bean or our children's output, so particularly in Australia, there's just a big market for British comedy, and also me performing comedy in other languages was more just kind of a challenge to myself.
So a lot of students are making comedy for each other, for themselves, and we're always encouraging you to think beyond what's immediately funny for your in-group and to think of selling that, to a wider audience. So that's perhaps something you'll be touching on today.
Yes.
You brought with you a beautiful slide from your photo shoot there. And
same shirt. That's my main advice. Get one good shirt. and
change the hat.
And change the hat. Or don't get a haircut for £4 in Singapore that you regret. That's actually. So I have. What I've done is I prepared just 6 slides just to provide a bit of a structure. But what would be great for me is if everyone in this room, and fuck the people watching this at home, you're here. So if there's like one thing that you want from this, hopefully if I go through these slides, that will at least start you thinking, oh yeah, maybe that's what I'd like to ask Ollie about, or that's what we'd like to talk about. I think if everyone can just leave with one little nugget of either inspiration or advice or something, then I'll feel like this trip's worth it. And so that's my plan for the structure, but I'm not wedded to it. If at any point we need to
I
deviate,
think Who
we
Am
should.
I is a good start. Good place to start.
Okay, so
who are you?
yeah, so who am I? So what is this? This is a picture I found from 15-ish years ago. Same shirt. This is in a comedy club in Osaka, Japan. My very brief history is I loved comedy. I absolutely adored comedy. It was my favourite thing as a kid. And I'm a big believer in that theory that whatever you are passionate about at the age of 13, you'll end up doing when you're 30. And I loved comedy. I loved watching comedy. I loved performing. But unfortunately, I did really well in my GCSEs. And so my school didn't let me do drama or music or anything I wanted to do. And it was, I remember, having this kind of battle with my head that I remember a couple of weeks before my GCSEs, I wanted to do a play. And she was like, you can't, you got your mocks. I don't care about my mocks, I care about this play. And so I went to law school and I trained to be a lawyer. But I promised myself once that's done, I'll go and do something interesting. And I didn't know how that would pan out. And so, trained as a lawyer. And then as soon as I graduated law school, I had a dilemma, which was I was given some job offers for loads of money. Right? I mean, it's absurd what a junior lawyer can get paid straight out of university. And I was like, goodness, if I do this, then that's it. That's it forever. And so I scammed the Japanese government, I think is the best way of putting it. They had a scholarship program that was based a lot on goodwill and trust, and I abused that trust. So I went out as an academic researcher in trademark law, so intellectual property. Don't worry, I won't tell you my copyright law jokes, you'll only steal them. All right, we're off. And so I spent 4 years in Japan, and almost as soon as I arrived in Japan, I ended up going to, this was the first English language comedy club in Japan that's still going. They also do Japanese shows, and I remember going and doing open mics. I set up a little room in the south of Japan in Fukuoka. I used to go to Tokyo. And, people who I met there, I remember meeting a comedian called Spring Day who was headlining the Tokyo Comedy Store 10 years ago, and, last year was on Live at the Apollo.
And when was this? What year was
2014 this would have been. And at the time there was a boom of comedy in Southeast Asia. So, this was kind of just pre-Umbrella Revolution in Hong Kong. There was a bit more optimism about the place. So
comedy by expats, by
so it was both.
Resident in Japan, or
it was both. So you've got some brilliant local talent who have really, you've got acts like Jason Leong, who's got 2 Netflix specials. He's a Malaysian act. Loads of brilliant Singaporean acts. So that area 10 years ago, all of these acts were doing open mics with us, and they were the trailblazers in their countries.
And in the audience, there were Japanese.
A mix, yeah. So the Japanese shows, the audience were Japanese people that wanted to learn English, and often they were just there to learn English, and they would bring a dictionary, and it would be a complete waste of their time and our time. In markets like Hong Kong and Singapore, it's just a huge expat community with a real paucity of entertainment. What do you spend your money on once you've just? Well, I mean, they spend their money on sex workers and drugs. That's what actually happens. But then once you've done that, then what? Comedy. And so at the time there's a real boom, and I was very lucky because with only 1 or 2 years' experience, touring acts such as, you've probably heard of Brendan Burns, he won the Perrier back in the day. He was touring and he did an opening act, and so it was amazing that I managed to kind of get that networking in when I did.
Did you ever think of going to comedy school in Japan, or turning it into a comedy act in Japanese?
I did try stand-up in Japanese. There was a Japanese comedian so Japan doesn't have stand-up really. It has what they call manzai, which is double act comedy, the boke and the tsukomi, or rakugo, which is traditional storytelling. These days there are stand-up comedians, and there are some very good ones. But certainly 15 years ago, there was literally about 10 people that. In fact, stand-up comedy was so new that there was. I might have even talked about this on the podcast back in the day. I was asked by a journalist, "How do you write stand-up in Japanese?" Like there are, like, The Economist has a guide on how you spell a certain country's name, or how you. They hadn't worked out how stand-up is written in Japanese yet. There were still 2 variations going. They went, "Do you have a preference?" Right now, it's whether it's stand-up or stand-up in katakana. So that's how new it was. They were still working out what to call it.
Because in Japan they traditionally have a sit-down comedy.
Rakugo.
Somebody sitting on a cushion telling conventional stories which are shared amongst the comedy community. You know, you can take other people's stories, other people's sort of templates and put your own spin on it. Is that right?
Yes, and then also Manzai double act comedy, which is quite Morecambe and Wise slapstick. I don't like making these broad cultural generalizations, particularly because I haven't lived there for so long. But I think it is still true to say that Japan doesn't have the tradition of holding the powerful to account with satire, right? Like we do. And so stand-up being a very personal art form where you talk about one's own struggles, it never really fitted well in mainstream Japanese society, and particularly the ruder stuff. Japanese TV is still a bit more conservative than our TV until after the watershed, when all hell breaks loose. So I think it's taken a while for Japanese audiences to learn how to be a stand-up audience. So I remember doing early stand-up shows in Japanese, and the MC having to say to the audience, if you find something funny or odd or questionable, that's your moment to laugh. We're not going to tell you what the punchlines are. And it seems crazy to have to explain that, but it's just like, I don't know, if you go and experience an art form for the first time, you might need to be told, if you go to a classical music concert, don't clap between the movements. Well, you don't know that until you're told, do you?
Did you find yourself coaching Japanese would-be stand-up comedians who wanted to
Well,
perform in
I
English?
wouldn't say coach, because we were all new and didn't know what we were doing, but we definitely, there's one example, Takashi Wagasuki, who I was friends with over a decade ago. He was a Japanese guy, wanted to get good at comedy in English, and I remember, sharing joke ideas with him. He's just been on the Australian version of Taskmaster, and so he had a vision. He went, I want to get really good at English stand-up. It won't happen in Japan. I have to leave the country, and so Australia was, and so I've just done a run of shows with him in Melbourne. It's amazing, really.
And your podcast, the Japan by River Cruise podcast, was with an American, Bobby Judo.
Yeah.
So that's another sort of cultural mix where you could. I heard one thing you were talking about kimono wear.
Yeah.
That's your first episode. There was this stuff about you were satirising adverts where people are advised what kinds of kimono to wear, and this particular kimono might be best for somebody who wants to have a mixed race child. This was the sort of Japanese promotional idea,
right.
Because it was sort of trendy.
Yeah. Okay, I forgot that sketch.
So.
But yes, and that's definitely true that British stand-up is its own thing, but we're still in the shadow of the Americans. We still stand on the shoulder of the Americans. And I've been having this chat with a couple of my British friends who are starting the process of getting the visa to go out there. And I think a lot of us feel that, if you want to be the best pastry chef and you go, yeah, but I won't bother with Paris. It's like, well, what are you thinking? Like, I actually don't feel like I'm a legitimate stand-up because I haven't cut my teeth in New York. I really do feel that.
Well, that was one of my questions, really. When did you feel like a real comedian? I mean, you said you loved comedy as a child. You were in Japan, and then
I still don't. In fact, a core memory of the Fringe was. I'll show you. I will show you a Japan-related slide. But a core memory of the Fringe a couple of years ago was the British Comedy Guide does a list of the best rated shows at the Fringe. So they just aggregate all the reviews. And I snuck in, literally the bottom of the list. And I did have this odd outer body thing of reading a bunch of comedians' names and then also seeing my name. And I know that sounds ludicrous, but it's all I do, stand-up, or at least comedy or stand-up adjacent things. But it's you spend the first 5 years thinking, how can this possibly work out? Right? And I remember watching stand-up on the TV as a kid going, well, who are these people? They're obviously aliens. There's no path from me being annoyingly good at maths, so my teachers say stop doing music or whatever. What's the path for that to go and stand on a stage? How do you call a theatre and book it?
And at one point you were forced into that because in lockdown you were stuck in Malaysia. How did that occur? You just couldn't get.
I couldn't get a flight back. So I was spending 2 weeks in Kuala Lumpur. I had a friend who owned a comedy club That's now shut down. And I was doing an MC residency. So I was MCing the club for 2 weeks. Great experience. And I was due to fly on to Melbourne for the comedy festival. Lockdown happened, got stuck. And I wrote about it. I say it's a very British thing to do, to outstay your welcome in that part of the world. But I was supposed to spend 2 or 3 weeks there, and ended up being there for over a year.
It was like a forced sort of training, if you like, forced period of intense.
100%, and it really affected. And I was there without a visa. I mean, this definitely shouldn't go online, but I was. The authorities definitely wanted me out, and we had to put me on stage with a fake name. So my name's Ollie Horn. I was on stage with a Muslim name. So because I built a small fan base there, right? And they were getting letters from the authority. Well, I'll tell you, this is genuinely true. The club received a round-robin letter from the ministry, some interior ministry, saying, "We've seen reports of foreigners abusing the goodwill of Malaysia, who have given a visa waiver to people who got stuck, performing illicit activities such as prostitution and live entertainment." Right? And I'm like, it's not got that bad. And so I was like, okay, well, look, I've got to stop sucking dick for money.
This is definitely not going to be something we would use to promote the cause.
So that's actually a very good broadcast trick. I've said that knowing that this can never be clipped and put online now, so I'll never get put in trouble. So then ultimately I was put on stage as Ali Tanduk. Ali is like, Islamic Ollie, and Tanduk is the Malay word for horn. And that's how it happened. So who is Ollie Horn? Basically, I am a comedian, but it happened basically because I moved to Japan, was supposed to be an academic in trademark law, joined an entertainment agency because I started doing all these open mics, and very quickly realised I can get away with never having a real job. And I've just spent the last 10 years getting away with it. And this is an example of what I did for money. That's me flying.
Marvellous. Well, if you ever want a career in musicals, I think you've got it there.
That was my real voice. They sent me to a recording studio.
What was it, the burger, though? On what
the burger disappears. When you're offered a big sum of money,
you'll hold a burger.
You don't ask questions. But my T-shirt said "I'm a foreigner" on it. So if that gives you a sense of how culturally sensitive it was. So that's kind of me. But what I wanted to kind of, all I want to impress on you is, I had no master plan, right? Like there was no sense that I could be doing these kind of shows that I'm doing now, doing the kind of work I'm doing now, if only I did. I was just throwing whatever I can at the wall. Anyway, that's me. I'm the least interesting thing. What is a joke? I know that some people here are more interested in writing than performance, and I know some people have already started their comedy practice. I think it's helpful to actually think about what it is we're trying to achieve, right? And so I've prepared some slides. This was when I was asked to teach a comedy course a while back. So I've just picked a couple of slides just as kind of a starting point of a discussion, right? Because I wish that I knew when I'd started that there isn't such thing as different styles of jokes. And I think you start off being very worried about, am I going to be a one-liner comedian? Am I going to be a dark comedian? Am I going to be a physical comedian? Am I going to be writing sketches? To me, none of that matters. This is just different content, right? An anecdotal comedian is still delivering jokes. A blue comedian, a prop comedian, a clown, a silent comedian are just delivering jokes. And so if I explain what I think a joke is, I think that will help you understand what I mean by that. So a joke is a short story which involves a conflict and a resolution. Another way of putting that is a joke is just a problem to solve, right? And I titled this presentation "Join the Dots Backwards" because I think sometimes joke writing is better when you start with the epiphany, I've solved a problem in an unusual way, and then work all the way backwards, right? I'll give you one example of of what I think is an absolutely brilliant joke by my friend Amos Gill, who's an Australian comedian, moved out to Australia. He has a joke where which has the conclusion, I know I would have owned a slave, right? So it starts with that, right? And you go, well, how can you possibly, right, in this day and age, say that you would have owned a slave, right? So what that is that's a problem to solve, right? He is standing on stage saying, I would have owned a slave. But he gets there, that's the punchline. He gets there by talking about how he knows that he is only adopting the moral code of the present day. He can see that there are vegans. Vegans are doing the right thing ethically and morally, but meat's delicious, right? So I know that by future standards, my grandchildren are going to hate me because I was a Homo sapiens supremacist or whatever, you know. Vegans are ethically doing the right thing. I'm not doing the right thing. Therefore, I'm only adopting the morals of my time. Therefore, in the past, I probably would have owned a slave, right? And so that's an example of, you might think of that as a bit, right? You might think, oh, that's a stand-up comedy bit. To me, that's a joke. That's Amos creating a really difficult problem for him to have to solve in front of the audience. How can I justify slave ownership to an audience of well-meaning people? And obviously, I don't need to tell you people this, it is a joke. He doesn't mean it, right? Obviously, it's a joke. But what's funny is the logic to get there is absolutely impeccable, right?
I can see the connection with maths as well. I'm beginning to understand why I failed maths as
Right.
well. You know, this is an extremely complicated sort of mathematical problem, but also there's the performance, isn't there?
100%. So that, if Amos had delivered those points, you would have been laughing, right? I was giving it to you in quite a clinical way. But I do think it's a bit mathematical, but I also do think it's very creative, because once you've identified the problem to solve, right, the way in which you unmask that, the way in which you reveal your reasoning to the audience is very creative. That's not mathematical. That's artistic. But definitely this sense of every time an audience is laughing, it's because they've solved the problem that you've presented to them incorrectly, and you've given them a different solution, right? I'll give an example of a one-liner that I used to open my set with. I used to say, I want you to acknowledge that I'm tall. I want you to see that I'm tall, because if you watch me on TV, I'm just fat, but here I'm tall and fat, right? So it's a little problem to solve. Why does he care that we can see that he's tall? Do you see what I mean? So there's an implicit problem there. There's what you might call a tension, or you might call a suspension. There's just something going on where the audience are like, I feel unsettled, right? There's an unsettling feeling, and you create that feeling of happiness. You resolve that feeling of feeling unsettled by giving a satisfying out.
Like a relief.
A relief, that's exactly it. Adam Bloom, in his book, talks about the balloon pop, right? And so the idea is, you're creating all this tension, then pop, the tension's released. So I'll give you just two examples of, before that. You've probably heard of the rule of three. I'm sure you've come across this in your literature or whatever. The rule of three is another way of talking about this. So if you've heard of the comedy rule of three, some people think it's about listing things. You've got to say three things, right? Nonsense. What the rule of three is a way of establishing there is a pattern which has created an expectation that is then subverted. So the rule of three is you create a scene, you establish here's the paradigm, here's your assumption. You then reinforce that incorrect assumption, and then you break it with a punchline. A really easy to remember example of this is a clown running around a circus ring. So imagine a clown runs out of a circus ring, right? And he runs around and he's waving to everybody as he goes around, and he trips on thin air in the middle, right? So he trips, he goes, what was that? I just tripped up. Then he's embarrassed about it, but he carries on running, and then he goes all the way around again, and in exactly the same spot, he trips up again. You're like, what the fuck? Try. Runs around for a third time, then what does he do? He jumps over thin air, right? That's only funny because of that second trip, right? And that's what the rule of three is about. The rule of three is about that second trip established the pattern, right?
It's this whole thing about making it worse, and I suppose if as well you're performing in a persona, I don't know if maybe you're going to get into persona, but one of the things that I found really appealing about the comedy for toxic people is this sort of grotesque character who's just getting worse and worse and creating tension through how repulsive they are in a way.
Look,
But somehow also allow.
Did I do that?
It's a clown tripping up in
We like it. Yeah, so the context for that is I did a show a couple of years ago called Comedy for Toxic People. And I played a character. My kind of thinking was, what if a guy that was kind of taken in by the manosphere attempted stand-up comedy, right? Because there's so many breakup shows. There's so many shows about love and romance, the Edinburgh Fringe. But there's I saw there was an opportunity to explore that kind of vulgar part of the male response to a breakup, right? And so I kind of maybe it was a bit ahead of its time, because if I'd done it now with the Manosphere documentary, I'm sure it would have sold better. But, I just noted early on that, the whole toxic male thing is essentially gay coded because they're all just trying to impress each other. So, my walk-up music was a gay anthem, and I was, just dressed queer adjacent. And by presenting myself as a grotesque man, right, as someone who just didn't get it, that was kind of the context for a certain audience expectation, right? So if we're thinking that all jokes are solving a problem, the context of my persona, which is, a fuckboy, a guy that's ready to get your girl, that context can inform the joke, right? When the audience are filling in the gaps, they're filling in. I'll give an example of a joke from the show. I'd say I'm a feminist. Just by me saying I'm a feminist, that gets a laugh. Why? Because me saying I'm a feminist plus me dressing and looking like I do is incongruous, right? That's a problem to solve. So I'd say I'm a feminist, laugh. Then I've got to resolve that problem. I go, that's how we get laid these days, right? So then do you see? The problem was presented to the audience by virtue of the context of that character.
And you can see the audience struggling with the problem. The part of the pleasure is in looking at other people's reactions to you directly addressing somebody.
It's not always a pleasure. I had some challenges. I mean, this was a show where, you can imagine with this kind of topic, there's people that sincerely hated it. And sometimes, and it was often women, often I'd get girls come to the show alone who'd seen my other shows, which were quite sweet. And I think they were just disappointed. They were so disappointed in me. They were just disgusted. And occasionally I would break them. I'd kind of, you could just see it in their face. They just kind of zone out and just go, what the fuck is it? What is this? And then I might just kind of look at them and say something like, you only hate me because you fancy me. Or just say something so absurd it kind of knocks them back into this mad world. But yeah, you're right.
That's a solution for them. Are you saying clearly this is a caricature?
Yeah. They have to know that this is a character. And the worst case scenario for them is, yes, it's a character, but I still believe this, and I'm using this as a vehicle to spread nastiness, right? Which I guess is.
And what was the tone of these sweet shows? How was this sort of operating in the sweeter shows, or was it not really being applied?
But in a sweet show, what you're doing is you're having to so. I did a sweet show about body positivity, right? I talked about what body positivity is. Can you be happy in a body that you wish to change? All this kind of stuff, right? So the context is I'm fat, right? So it's like you could work out that's a context in which if I'm talking about something, you can go, well, he probably wants to eat more of that then, right? So I guess this is of course, and this is quite in the weeds of comedy writing, but. If you are a stand-up comedian, you're performing, a lot of the laughs will come from the thoughts that the audience have about you as an individual. And that's why stand-up comedy is actually quite challenging, because you can't really control that, right? Like, you might think you look a certain way, but you don't. You might think that you're cool, but the audience will very quickly tell you if you're not. You might think you're hot, the audience, that's quite hard. Mm-hmm. And you see it a lot with male acts who think that they can get away with being, a laddie, cheeky chappy. It's like, man, you're in your 40s and you're balding, and the audience don't think this is cool anymore, right? And it's so much of, and this is why often acts from marginalised backgrounds have a harder time too, because if an audience isn't exposed to that community, right? You know, I think about a friend of mine who's male to female trans. A lot of their opening gags have to be about them being trans, right? Because they're going to venues where this might be the first time these audiences ever seen a trans person in the flesh, right? So of course they've got to address it to slightly control that narrative, right? So, and I'm sure that's also true for, you know, acts who come from different backgrounds, speak with different accents. Whatever the audience is thinking, that is actually the reality, right? It doesn't matter if you think differently. Like a friend of mine who is Malaysian is Chinese on stage because they are ethnically Chinese. They're born in Malaysia, but they've got Chinese ethnicity. Who cares for an opening gag to go through the intricacies of how that happens? No, they're Chinese, easy.
And how does this play into how you write? I mean, because you're obviously testing the material and changing the material as you perform it. How much do you invest in the writing?
Well,
the combination?
I think comedy is all about writing. And I think a lot of comedians are people that want to perform that then kind of reluctantly learn that it's about writing. Mm-hmm. And then there are also some other comedians like Gary Delaney, who is like, he's quite an odd performer. He just looks like a man telling jokes, right? He's got no pizzazz. Mm-hmm. But he's such a good writer that it kind of doesn't matter, right? I think Mark Simmons would fall into that category too. He's a one-liner comedian. I mean, he's a great performer. He's got a twinkle in the eye and he's you know, handsome and whatnot. But it's the quality of his gags that I think drive him. I watch myself back. So if I'm writing a new show, I'll look at my physicality. One technique that I'll give that I'm always embarrassed when I tell people this is my technique, but it does work, is once you've been going long enough, you start to get a sense of how the audience are laughing at your stuff. So you learn there are different types of laughter, right? Sometimes it's like laughter of shock or the same laugh that a bully might do. Or, you know, some laughs you don't want, right? Some laughs are just joyous. And so what I'll do is I will, before I fall asleep, I will watch myself perform in my own dream, right? So I'll watch me on stage doing the material that I've written, and then it sounds ridiculous, but I've got a good sense of what kind of laugh that will get. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't seem like it sounds ridiculous, but if it doesn't seem if my imaginary audience isn't laughing the way I want, I'll change it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of a lot of stand up in your early days is just about you getting a skill set. So you shouldn't really worry about this kind of thing. Until you've got any kind of skill set, you shouldn't worry. An open mic is absolutely for you. It's not for the audience, right? But once you start to perform to audiences that are paying to see you, or you know, doing your open spots at pro clubs, you kind of got to have a bit of empathy for the audience to know it's like it is their night out, and we are entertainers. And so you do need to think, well, what kind of thing are they in the mood to laugh about? You know, maybe I've got some really interesting stuff about some trauma or abuse or whatever, but man, this is like Just the Tonic, Leicester, Saturday 9 p.m. Mm-hmm. Save the stuff about, do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of got to have a bit of empathy for the context as well.
So you select depending on the audience and the response you're getting in the moment?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the longer I do this, the more I will like vibe it. Like, I just did a weekend in Bath. So this weekend I was in Bath. I did 2 clubs. There's Comedia, which is like a 300-seater, quite a big comedy club. And then there's Jesters, which is a room, you know, like a basement kind of room. Both brilliant clubs. But the medium is the message, right? Like when you're walking down a little pokey flight of stairs and there's only other 40 seats, you feel different to when you're sat on a big table and you've just paid for a meal and a drinks package, and the comedians are on a big stage.
Entertain me.
Yeah, so you know, in one night I did 3 sets because I opened one club, went to another, went back, closed the other club. All 3 sets were completely different. I don't think I've repeated a single gag, and that's because I really vibed it. The vibe of the late show was completely different to the vibe of the early show.
So, and what would you tell your younger self? Now you've got these experiences in different venues, and you've got some, not that you stick to this rigidly, but you've got a sense of how it works, how the formula works. What would you potentially tell people who are about to?
Well, my best work now is my mad stuff, and I wish I'd experimented far more when I was younger, because I really thought people cared. You know, like I really thought that I've got to just do my best, most polished stand-up, and I've got to memorize my lines. Turns out, you can basically make no mistake in your first 5 years of stand-up that will affect your career. Right? There's just like you can't bomb so bad no one ever books you again. And so I kind of wish that I've only really got the confidence now to I'm kind of established with certain clubs that I can kind of maybe not get away, but they'd be understanding if I had a dodgy set. They go, oh, that's just Ollie not on form. That wouldn't have been true 5 years ago, right? And so that kind of sticky middle where you start getting pro work, you're kind of stuck with the best of what you've done in your first 5 years. Do you know what I mean? So what I'm trying to say is, if I'd experimented more in my first 5 years and done more different styles, written sketches, done silly voices, whatever, I'd have more to play with when I was starting to do the pro work. It's only now that my kind of feet are under the table a little bit with certain clubs or with certain venues in Edinburgh, where if I've got a mate who runs a venue in Edinburgh now who, I can say to him, I've got an insane idea. I'm going to tell the audience, I've got a theory that in any given room, someone's eaten the most toast. I'm going to ask every audience member how much toast they've had. And he doesn't veto it, right? And that's the kind of thing that I should have been doing in my first year. You know what I mean? But I didn't have the confidence.
And how much is sort of social media and other competitions and other things, how much are they part of your activity alongside all the
I didn't really do too many competitions. I think they are good. I think it's probably a mistake for newer acts to put their stand-up online. I think there are other things that you should be putting online. I think sketches probably. But I think, again, with stand-up, sort of the medium is the message. And so if the gigs that you're doing in your first few years are necessarily kind of crap. It's like the environment's not helping you do well. They're a hostile audience. They've often not paid. They've often seen 10 other acts, half of which have got some form of mental illness. It's a really challenging environment to do well. Definitely document it and watch it back, but no one is watching. No one is watching you in the back of a cafe competing with people that don't want to watch you, with a bad PA system and low lighting, and going, well, that content brings me joy. Do you know what I mean? So I just think, use your creative juices to do whatever else you can, but stand up, I'd probably just wait a bit.
This is all really great food for thought, and one of the sort of promises, I suppose, of our session today is that there'll be an opportunity to talk about your own material, to sort of work on some of your questions and some of your ideas. And I know we've got comedy writers and performers in the room here, and you've provided a fantastic sort of stimulus
to do that discussion. Point. Was it helpful if I give you 2 joke examples, and maybe you can think about your jokes in these terms? So, are you kind of all? Do you know what I mean now by the rule of 3? Yeah. It's nothing to do with. It's to do with this idea of a pattern, of an expectation, right? I'll give you one more example before I do these jokes. Could you ask me where the bathroom is?
Literally?
Yeah, just say, where's the bathroom?
Is it? Can you tell me where the bathroom is, please?
The bathroom, yes. So you need to head through these double doors, take your first right, and go and ask someone who gives a fuck.
Okay.
Now, why is that funny? It's funny because of that, take the right. Right? That's not funny if I go through those double doors and
I think that's literally what I said to Doris when she came.
But the pattern is established through me saying to you, because then you're like, I'm about to find out where the toilet is. Does that make sense? So I'll give you these 2 jokes. John Stewart, I celebrated Thanksgiving in an old-fashioned way. I invited everyone around in my neighbourhood to my house. We had an enormous feast. And then I killed them and took their land, right? The reason that's funny is because of that middle bit establishing the pattern. If he'd said, I celebrated Thanksgiving in an old-fashioned way, I killed them and took their land, it would get a laugh, actually, but it wouldn't get a comedy club laugh. Do you know what I mean? It'd get sort of maybe a Radio 4 titter. Dulce Sloan, brilliant comedian. I'm single, which is weird because I have boobs big enough for each of them to have their own boyfriend, right? Why is that funny? It's that which is weird. Which is weird makes this a joke. Why? Because that's her going, I'm single, but I know why. Right? I'm single, but I've got the explanation. Right? That's weird. Because, and we expect something rational and something. And then this is why Dulce is a brilliant writer, because the joke works. I'm single, which is weird because I've got massive tits. That would actually be quite funny. But this is her using like really good writing skills and developing the, how do you describe big tits?
It's also just about the boyfriends themselves, isn't it? It's about
Yeah,
what they're particularly
exactly. Are they suckling? And this is taken from Steve Martin's book. Basically, what we want is, we don't want the establishing of the pattern to be so obscure that the audience never make it over the cliff, right? We don't want to misdirect too much, because otherwise they'll never get it. But we also don't want to make it too easy. If the joke, if you get over the cliff without any effort, it's not a big laugh. It's only a big laugh when you really have to think about it. And those are the most satisfying laughs as a comedian. The ones where you... I'll give you one example from my set, which is, I did this in Australia. So I transited in Singapore, and I took a flight from Singapore to Malaysia. And as I got on this plane, I realised I was the only white person on the entire plane, which is a big responsibility. Because if this plane crashes, I'm the reason it's global news. and the laugh comes from the audience going, and it's like, you can see the audience try and get over the cliff to work out I guess if the Times reported it, they'd say 1 Briton dead. All that has to happen, right? And then particularly with dicey subject matter like race, get it wrong, if they don't get over the cliff, they then assume bad faith, right? And the audience then go, what the fuck is this guy? Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think that's really, really important. All right, so yeah, that's what I've got on joke writing. Does anyone have...
Does this ring some bells? I mean, is this connecting with your own writing processes and your own... What are your theories of jokes? I mean, this is a proposal. We'd be really interested to hear, George, you're nodding away. What have you got? What's crossing your mind as you listen to this?
As soon as you mentioned the writing theories, and then you mentioned thank you. So as soon as you were mentioning the writing theories, I use a lot of rule of threes within my stand-up, and I do follow Adam Bloom, for example, with his Bloom hopping and his seesaw theory, and how it has to be evenly weighed and stuff. And I really connected with that, so I did completely accept what you were saying. It was very what I do in my stand-up. I kind of see that.
I'll just intervene here. If you've not read Adam Bloom's book, it's very, very good. And it's called How to Find Your Comedy Genius, I think. One criticism I have of the book, and I don't mind saying this because I've said it to his face, so I can say it to you, is the book is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. Right? It's not a template for here's how to write jokes. It's exactly what you said, which is, I've noticed I'm doing this in my writing, and it's a way of you going, intuitively I knew I was doing this. And Adam's he is a genius at going, here's what you're doing, right? And it gives you this kind of sense of, so I would definitely say grab the book once you've written some comedy as a way of understanding what you've written rather than as a template for writing. Does that make sense?
How much do you emphasise the writing and how much do you emphasise the performance? Are you writing for performance or are you performing and then checking back?
I do a bit of both. So when I first start off with writing, because I feel like writing is critical when it comes to stand-up and your delivery of jokes. You can pick a topic, any topic, and you go into detail about it and write it. And then when it comes to performance, you have to analyse of how the audience have reacted to that. So I do a bit of that, and then I come back and I see which went right, what went wrong, and why did it go wrong, and therefore I can improve that.
Yeah. And what normally goes wrong?
Well, you said a lot about the cliff. Sometimes I do topics which are a bit dangerous to tackle, and sometimes it's the way I've said it, and I haven't given enough for the audience to expect the other punchline to it, like the actual meaning of the joke.
So the audience maybe assume a bit of bad faith. They go, oh, he's in the dangerous... I got given really good advice by Joe Pasquale,
Mm-hmm.
comedy hero. I think it is the best advice I've ever got, which is they've got to like you. And like so much of it comes down to that I think if you watch that footage back, you'd probably realise you've done a couple of, without knowing it, unlikable things. You know, like things you've forgotten to smile, you've forgotten to check that the audience wants to hear this. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I teach an MC workshop for people that are learning how to be MCs, and the heuristic that I use for that, the kind of the framework for the whole workshop is: imagine you're the host of a dinner party, right? Don't imagine you're performing at a comedy club. Imagine you're hosting a dinner party, right? Would you, as soon as you've sat down and you're breaking the bread and offering some butter, go, oh, fucking Iran, they're pissing me off, right? You wouldn't, right? You wouldn't just go, I found a lump and it's worrying me, right? But you might actually say that over dessert once you've had a couple of drinks. Do you know what I mean? And so it's all about, and Stuart Lee talks in one of his books about how the relationship a comedian has at the end of a show with their audience is different at the beginning of the show, necessarily, right? He's earned the right at the 60-minute mark, because he's earned that trust. And so it's so challenging in a 5-minute set. I'm guessing you're doing 5s and 10s at the moment?
Yeah, I'm starting to do 10s, and I've been doing golden shows and stuff like that.
It's really hard. Like, it's so hard, but just kind of stick at it and know that all this technical and impressive stuff you want to do will become possible when you're doing 20s.
Yes.
Because you've got that 5 minutes for them to warm to you. Yeah. And I would hate hearing this advice, but like, this stuff will be good. Don't force it now. No. Keep a note of it. Know that you've got these great ideas, these great insights, and you'll probably find in a year or two, you'll find the context. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now you're at the point of doing an hour in Edinburgh.
I think I've done 5 now.
Yeah.
An hour isn't an hour's. The Edinburgh hour is even different because you've already got a relationship with your audience because they bought a ticket to see you. So that changes, and particularly now that I've definitely not got a big audience, but I've got a very loyal one, right? So every year, I said this, and I've said this in my last tour. I go, I'm at the level of comedy where I don't really have profile, but I do have fans, right? But not many. I recognise them before they recognise me. And it's kind of true that every time I do a show, I'm like, I do spot familiar faces. And so that provides a bit of context too. Like, I know that I can get away with far more because they've, necessarily they like my sense of humour. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is you might be on the right track with some of this daring stuff, but it might just be you haven't got a chance for the audience to like you because you haven't got the time yet.
Well, yeah, I've started to move away from it and make it just all personal instead.
Yeah.
And allow that humour to come from self-deprecation.
Yeah.
And then later on, I feel like I might try and re-establish all that stuff I have going with like the dark stuff or the edgy, well I say edgy, but other stuff that I have in mind. So yeah, but I at the moment I've tried to make it personal instead.
Yeah.
And allow the audience to understand me and introduce me so they have some sort of establishment of what they can expect.
And you're so right that talking about you doesn't mean that you're not talking about the audience. Because what an audience does is they slot themselves into your life anyway, right? Like, I'll give a really simple example. If you want to talk about the experience of shitting yourself, right? It's much better to talk about, here's what I do when I'm caught short, right? That is easier for an audience to palate than going, here's what I've noticed you will do. It will be identical material, but if you're making it about you, like, I'll give you one example from my actual, I have a bit about how I'm ashamed to be using Uber Eats, right? And I had just a bunch of observations about how people order food on delivery apps. And it all came together once I put it all through the lens of I'm ashamed now, right? And so, you know, I'll do stuff like, you know, I'll just think of one good example. We're the first generation in human history that we know where our next meal is coming from. Every other one of our ancestors, food scarcity was the big problem. We know within 30 minutes we're going to get a meal. I've got 30 minutes to do whatever I want. What a privilege. I could paint, I could draw, I could write. What do? I watch this man. Right? And that only got a laugh once I put it in first person pronoun. I watch this man. You watch this man is a bit confronting.
What about other people? Is this speaking to you? Any people using personas, you know, where this host is not necessarily reliable, for instance? Or what's your angle on what we've heard? Have you got a question there? Passing
Hi. So I did my first comedy thing ever last month.
Great.
With you. Hello. Hi. I'm really an actor and playwright. So I did my first comedy thing as a character because I was like, I can't fucking be myself on stage. That's so embarrassing. But like I saw you on Monday, you were excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
I don't like how supportive this is. This is not what comedy's like.
I guess it's that thing of I know I'm an idiot in real life, so I know I have too many stories about myself to kind of put on a stage, but there seems to be so much, and I know you need to have that crispy 5.
Well, yeah, but it probably goes back to thinking in terms of jokes.
Yes.
So audiences generally don't want to hear funny stories. What they want to do is hear jokes. And those stories can become jokes if you work out what is the problem that I've solved in an unusual way. And so you can think about it through the lens of you've got a story where you presumably made a bad choice, which resulted in something bad happening.
Continuously.
Right? If that bad choice is so stupid, the audience are like, well, I'd never do that. That's just ridiculous, right? Once you've made a left turn that's so unreasonable, the audience will stop relating to it and they'll stop believing all the rest of it, right? So your challenge is, you've got this story of you doing some mad shit, find a way of making the audience empathise with why you made that batshit decision, right? So you might go to, it might have been the single most rational thing to do to punch your sister in the face on her birthday. That might have made complete sense to you at the time, but we need to know the steps to get you there. And that's kind of a sitcom writing journey, right? Like sitcom characters just make a series of bad decisions, but at each juncture we're kind of with them. You know what I mean? Like every time they escalate, we're like, oh, I see why you would do that because you were panicking, or you know, you were short of cash, or whatever it was. So these stories, think of them in terms of jokes. Think of them in terms of the conflict and the resolution, right? What's the setting? What's the subversion? What have you done to solve a problem in a surprising way? Does that make sense?
Completely.
Yeah.
I think the question that I wanted to ask the most was like, I'm literally just starting, like very much starting out in stand-up. I'm going to like gong shows like at Frog and Bucket. Like,
Great.
Going to like the Comedy Balloon, just watching.
Creatures as well, I hope.
Creatures, yeah.
Very
the
good.
7 o'clock, like Monday Hatched show. I'm just watching and seeing how it works, what you do, what you don't do. But I'm kind of wondering what that like first 6 months looks like and how to like assess your ability to do it.
I'll answer that first one. This is really easy. There are no gatekeepers. There are no rules. There's no comedy police. There's no secret industry, right? There's no inside outside. You've all got a right to do it, and there's literally no one that can stop you. So like that first one is easy to solve. I probably, this isn't good advice, but I would say the only KPI for the first year is that you haven't quit. I really think like first year of doing gigs, like what is it that unites every professional comedian? We've all not quit, right? So it's like, so just do that. just don't quit. And so I would just mitigate against things that are going to make you quit.
How do you deal, for example, how would you deal with silence? How do you deal with it? Just thinking of simple techniques like that might put you off, things that might put you off, how to mitigate.
I'm a playwright, so I love silence.
Ah, yeah.
So, like, give me a pin to one that's so long and so disgusting that you just kind of...
Yes, but you know, that's challenging at an open mic where the audience aren't necessarily there for that, or the audience will want to address the silence. What you could do, I'll try and answer this question in good faith. I think you could plan for those things and work out what your strategy is before you're on stage, because when you're on stage, it's really hard to be creative on multiple vectors, right? Like when you're on stage, you want to be in a flow state about your material. You don't want to be having this meta thought process of, oh, I hope the camera's going to be good for my clip, and I hope that if there's a heckler, I know how to deal. Like, you can't be thinking about anything else, right? If you're doing comedy well. And so I would probably plan for, it's possible that I will forget my next joke, right? What will I say in that moment? So rather than having to create that in that moment, come up with it in advance. Or, you know, it's possible that I might tell a joke that the audience don't get, that I'm actually the victim in that. I'm not actually being mean, right? How would you address that afterwards and come up with those plans? So then when you're in those difficult moments, you're kind of in execution mode rather than creation mode. That's probably what I would say. And it's really hard, right? The only way you can really do it, I think, is to, as you're doing, watch loads of comedy and see how other people do it. And this isn't an advert for copying them, but it's an advert for going, well, there's clearly loads of strategies to do with hecklers. Some people play a very dominant role and they go, I've got the mic, I'm on stage, shut up, right? Some people kind of kill them with kindness. They give them enough rope that they hang themselves, right? Some people treat a heckle like it's a genuine inquiry. You know, that's Stuart Lee's approach, right? So you can kind of work out in advance. You don't know what's going to work for you, but you might go, today I'm going to try the high status. If anyone dares heckle me, I'm going to tell them what a piece of shit they are, right? And that might not work. You might feel awful and icky and go, right, okay, the next time someone heckles me, I'm going to be really sincere and go, can I just point out that doing stand-up comedy is my dream and you're getting in the way of that, right? You might be really earnest and that might work for you. But until you experiment, how can you know?
It's a great distinction, creation, execution, as long as it's not executing yourself. How about other people? George again, how about that behind? All right, yeah.
I normally thank them.
You normally offend them?
I thank them.
Thank them, oh, right.
Like, if someone says something, I go, oh, thank you. And then just carry on, because it almost like they don't expect me to just address them and then just carry on.
Yes, yeah. I like that.
Yeah, or if it is a genuine inquiry, which I'm like interested with, I will repeat the question, see what they come up with an answer, and see where that goes for a bit. And if it goes nowhere, I'll move on. But sometimes it can lead to stuff that I quite like. Yeah,
and forgive me, this is the second time I'm quoting Pasquale, but I do think he's an absolute genius. He said in an interview...
We're laughing because his son came to Salford Uni. Grandson, right.
Oh, really?
We had a Pasquale.
Oh, cool. He said in an interview, the audience are also performers. And it's such a great insight into how, and this kind of goes back a bit to what you were mentioning about Japan, that, you know, part of stand-up is that the audience are there and are holding us to account, right? You know, the audience are going, I don't think you're quite right, how I say, you know, there is that kind of game, which Rakugo doesn't have. Manzai doesn't have it as much because the bokke and the tsukomi is happening on stage. This guy says something stupid, and in Japanese comedy is almost always men. This guy says something stupid, this guy goes, what the fuck, that was stupid. Whereas in stand-up, it's the audience's job to go, you know, you've reached the wrong conclusion.
And very often it's wordplay, or you know, in Japan it's very often about playing with the meaning of language and the sort of double meaning of words and puns and so on. Are there any people writing here who are writing in that way, or playing with language, or just thinking in a technical way like that? Chris, what do you want to say?
I did do a little bit of that. In college, I did music tech, so not necessarily anything comedic. But I wanted to take the opportunity to find how I could do that. So I wrote a rap, which in of itself I thought was just hilarious.
So I'll just say that that's to do with persona and context, right?
Right.
Because like what you're saying is someone like me shouldn't be rapping,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that goes back to that point we were saying earlier that it's you must have come across a guy called MC Hammersmith. He's a freestyle rapper, brilliant guy. Part of the joke is he's a kind of a toff, right? He's this kind of middle class, white, skinny, right? By rights, he should not be rapping that well, right? And so part of the joke is the persona is contextualizing. That's a problem to solve. How can this dorky looking, and I mean that with affection, he's a friend, but how can this guy, he even gets a laugh when he goes, I'm gonna freestyle a rap for you. That gets a laugh because that's a problem to solve. That's a joke.
Yeah, it's so incongruent. You don't think he's gonna do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But what you were saying about wordplay is so in the example of this unit that we had to do, we had a theme. It was like we had to create an album, and we each had to write one song for this album in our class, and the theme for the album was called Expectations. Well, that's like comedy 101, isn't it? So I thought, brilliant. So I had the idea of the song kind of stemmed from the idea of subverting those expectations, where I would say something and it sounds like it's going to be something proper gangster, and it's not.
Yeah.
Which kind of also makes it make sense why this white guy is rapping, because he is a white guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the RAF men talking street talk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly. But that's a really good example of, the first slide I put about how all these different styles of comedy, it is just jokes. What you're doing there is a series of jokes. It's a series of kind of pranks on the audience. You thought this, but now this.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one of the lines was, it's like MC Richard on the mic, also known as MC Dick Van Dyke. Walk up to the club and I sneak inside. Psych, a gentleman always waits in line.
Great.
And just goes on like that, one after the other. But yeah, because I was talking to you, George, is that I'm trying to think about what my persona would even be. Am I someone who is a different character each time? Am I one thing? Am I the other? And so finding who that persona is has been really tricky at the moment.
Well, I've got advice on that, which is you don't decide it. And that's the genius of this. Like it is, what's that? The sculptor analogy. Like your persona's in there. You just got to chip away and find it. So you can't do it by force. And it's kind of. It's also, and this is something which again, like if I were at your level and you heard someone at my level say this, I'd think you fucking tosser. But it is also a question of your persona is also you just knowing yourself as a person, and it's like your 20s is just really hard, and that's when a lot of people start comedy, because you still don't really know who you are, right? And so persona also just becomes easier when you just like learn what you actually care about and learn what you're willing to let slide and learn what matters to you. So I think the reason why persona is so tricky is it's supposed to be a reflection of you. It's like, well, if you haven't done the work on who you are, and why would you? Like your 20s is hard enough as it is. You know what I mean? So yeah. I just wouldn't worry. I really wouldn't care other than like play and try loads of different ones.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Well, I've almost got too many questions now. The thing I'm struggling with, like, I've got like a good 5 minutes, but like I don't know how to turn that into something more,
What for?
What do you mean?
Or why do you need to turn it into something more?
Well, like in terms of turning it into like an 20 minutes or an hour or like.
Right. Okay. So first thing I'd say is wait until you actually have that problem. But by that I mean, when you're writing your first hour, that's probably the time to worry about how on earth can I write the hour. You know what I mean? Like definitely solve the smaller problems first. I think this is definitely not me knowing the answer. This is just my approach. I think other comedians would have a different approach. I think there's something to be said for kind of binning that 5 minutes that you've got and writing a brand new one. And the reason I think that, and again, there will definitely be comedians that will say, no, that's the 5 minutes you should be honing and polishing. You should have a bulletproof 5, festival ready clips, whatever. I think what we're actually doing every time we go on stage is just developing a skill set, right? Like, what matters is not our material, but us. And so I think if you get in this habit of going, oh, how can I polish this and how can I extend this and what if I can... There's something to be said for going, okay, well, I've learned from that process of writing those 5 minutes. It's made you a better writer. It's made you a better performer. You've learned how to stand on stage. By performing those 5 minutes, you've realised that you stand on stage with the heels of your feet, not the balls of your feet, and you've realised that you've got a weird tick where you'll move them. All that stuff is really what it's all about. So I would say, bin those 5 minutes, write a brand new 5, kill your darlings.
I've got a good opener and I've got a good closer.
Write another new opener and a new closer.
But that's the thing. I keep trying to do that.
But you, what I'm trying to say is you'll have to do that eventually.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'll talk about this in the last part of my presentation about, how I managed to make a living as a comedian. Because it's not just circuit work, right? I do festival shows, I do hours, I do the clubs, I do cruises, I do corporate work. Each of those requires a different opener. So at some point you're going to, unless you have, I wish you luck and I wish you have a career where you only have to focus on one vertical, but there's not many of those left, right? So you are going to have to work out, if you did a radio interview and they wanted a quick, you got to get a quick laugh for that first, who are you? You'll need a quick zinger. So you're going to have to write this stuff eventually. And this isn't me saying that 5 minutes can't be improved. And of course, you could sit down and turn that into 10 minutes, easy peasy. But what you actually want to do is not build up a warehouse of material, but you want to build up your skill set. And it's easier to build up that skill set where you go, right, what's your 5 minutes about, generally?
It varies.
Okay, but if I set you the challenge of saying I need... But if I said to you, I need 5 minutes, I said, you're about to present a corporate for Greg's, I need 5 minutes on donuts, and you've got a week to do it, you would do it. You would write 5 minutes on donuts, right? So would it be the best 5 minutes? No, because you haven't developed the skill set to do that yet. But how are you going to do that without doing it? So a bit like a donut, it's circular.
It sounds like you're saying that when you reach your next level because you've got another challenge.
Yes.
And I think that this is a good point, perhaps, to segue into this advice, which is often what we come to these sort of talks for. Like, how did you break through to these?
Yeah. So
levels?
this is what I wish I knew. So I was talking about how in joke writing I've got this theory that you kind of join the dots backwards, right? You work out, as we did with Amos's joke. Here's the I would have owned a slave. Now let's join the dots backwards and work out how that's defensible. I think it's the same for a career, right? And so what I wish I knew is essentially anything I've ever done that's good in comedy, I've not realised how I got it until after. I know that sounds ridiculous. So this is why I gave this. I've put this newspaper article in. This is from a few years ago. This newspaper article is the reason that next week I'm going on a cruise ship and earning more money in a week doing comedy than I earned in my first 3 years put together. Right? How's this happened? Well, this is the story. I did a show at the Edinburgh Fringe 4 years ago where, for the first time, I publicly said that Joe Pasquale was my favourite comedian. and that's quite funny. So it's a funny thing to say, because he's so uncool, right? And when you do a show at the Fringe and you work with a PR, they'll want a list of topics that your show's about so they can pitch it to media. And my show was about mental health and domestic abuse and all sorts of quite heavy stuff. But I also put, and the show's quite heavy on Joe Pasquale content, right? Almost as a joke for my PR, right? Just to make Julian laugh. Then what happens is, day 2 of the Edinburgh Fringe, this is I think 4 years ago now, Joe Pasquale has an accident in a theatre where he trips over some antlers backstage, and because he has a joke where he puts antlers on it, he goes, "I think I put too much mousse on my hair." Right? And so those antlers were backstage. He trips. It genuinely nearly kills him, right? So he gets rushed to A&E. So now there's like a big media round on who can give comment on Pasquale, right? And there's only one man that's qualified. There's only one man that's bravely put himself, and it's me, right? So I genuinely that day the phone's ringing off the hook, right? I get media request after media request on. Can you give a line about Pasquale, please, right? And so this is I think the Daily Star. Anyway, it was one of the red tops. When news emerged that Joe Pasquale nearly maimed himself on stage, fellow comedian Ollie Horn was quick to get in touch to make sure his hero was okay. Now, you can tell what a non-story this is. They've used 2 pictures of me which make no sense whatsoever, right? This is clearly just like they grab the media kit and print, right? So this then makes it to Pasquale, right, who I had been in touch with before, but on a very kind of arm's length basis. His agent sees this. I then, after the Fringe, go to one of his tour shows. He offers me tickets. And I go watch his show, and I see the prop that caused all this, And then we get chatting, and he goes, "Would you like an introduction?" Because I was unsigned at that point. Right? I had chats with a bunch of agents, and none of them were really a good fit, and for all sorts of reasons that maybe if you want to talk about, we can. But I think by the time that you're at the level of getting signed, the industry would have changed wholesale again, so who knows. But he said, "Oh, do you want an introduction to my agent? She might be a fit." And so obviously you take the call. And then Nicola, who is now my agent, at the time kind of fobbed me off and was like, "Well, all of her clients are like, not me." And then, but she was interested in the fact that I'd done some kids comedy. She thought it was very interesting that I'd done stand-up comedy for children, which I only ever did because I wanted to set a challenge for myself, right? And so what I'm trying to say, so then she was kind of interested that I'd done that, and then she could see, okay, well, if he does that, and I know he does corporates, I could maybe get him on cruises, and that could earn me some. Do you see? And so, if I'd gone at your stage, within 10 years, I want to be performing on a cruise, I actually don't think I'd know the path. But what I do know is me being really authentic and saying as a joke on stage, Joe Pasquale is unironically the best comedian going, and I slag off Stuart Lee in this routine. And I've got a funny story about how Stuart Lee was in the queue for my show when I was about to talk about that, and it got me in a lot of trouble. So that.
You can't stop that. You have to say more about that.
Well, long story short, Stuart Lee was in the queue for the wrong show, and I thought he was coming into my show because he was in the queue for my show. And then I did the bit where I slag off Stuart Lee as a joke, obviously, but he slags off people for a joke. And I just make jokes about how I love the fact that Joe Pasquale is a joke thief, because a bit like a trip to the British Museum, I just enjoy the output without thinking about the provenance, right? So anyway, but as I was doing this bit, I was convinced Stuart Lee was in it, and also I know that Stuart was, friends with someone who it was plausible that he was going to. Anyway, I muddled through that bit, and a review came out for that show going, Ollie didn't seem very sure of himself about his defence of Joe Pasquale. I'm like, you bet. Anyway, point is, this article is kind of one node in me being on this cruise ship. You can just never know what the pinball of life will do. But
one big tip is to sabotage the stage props.
Yeah, exactly. But what you can do is kind of widen your surface area of serendipity. Just do shit, publish it, create stuff, talk about what you're legitimately interested in, right? And because I'm one of only 2 comedians on the circuit, me and Jack Gledo, who both think that Joe Pasquale is the best comedian ever, right? There's only 2 of us. So, because I'm completely authentic about this, and then the next time something about Japan happens, it'll probably be me because I'm authentic about that. The point is, I wish I'd known that all these stupid little side projects I was doing, the article I wrote on a blog platform that never went anywhere, the podcast that ultimately came to nothing, you can ultimately join the dots backwards. And, I've got a couple of really exciting things that I'm doing this year. And I feel so blessed and privileged to be doing them. Even this Australia tour happened not because I planned it, but because I met the right person who saw me at the right thing. And you can never plan it. You really can never plan it. But what you can do is increase the chances of cool shit happening by being radically authentic from the beginning. Like if you're really, really into a certain food or type of music or country or subculture or whatever, don't be ashamed of incorporating that and living and breathing that, because one day that will be the reason that an agent from a big agency also happens to love this, and you meet them at a thing. Do you know what I mean? No, and I really do imagine that counterfactual. I would never have emailed Nicola out the blue to say I'd like representation. There's no way I would have come across. I wouldn't have been. We're a great fit. I'm really glad that she's my agent, and I wouldn't want another one. But how can I have known that? Do you know what I mean?
I hope this has fired you up or stimulated you. I hope you're thinking, yeah, I can do this. I can get there. We've got time for one more
Q&A
question, I think. Is anybody still itching to ask something? Yes.
Who's
Adam.
not asked something? That would fascinate me. But yeah, go for it.
Well, I have another one. But,
Got another one.
You
Good.
did. To be fair, you did flag that you got a bunch of questions. Was I helpful with that 5-minute thing? I know it's not what you want to hear, but
no, definitely. What I was thinking about what you were saying at the start. You were talking about how you felt you weren't an adequate comedian because you hadn't broken New York. And I was just. It was sort of weird, sort of thinking a lot of the stuff you see coming out of America is just sort of online. It's just sort of this sort of crowd work sort of clips, and that's how a lot of comedians are getting a lot of notoriety just by going, oh, what's your job, blah blah. I think I've lost my train of thought here, but.
Maybe this is your material.
I think my point is, what specifically would you say was the difference between a British sense of humour and an American sense of humour, and how the
yeah,
different
I don't have good insights on that. I'm thinking of America more from kind of like a commercial lens, that but by that I mean, it's just such a robust market and ecosystem that no one that regularly plays the Comedy Cellar is bad at comedy. Whereas we still have circuit acts that are not tip top. And, I just because I've travelled and done comedy a lot, you can see a correlation between the density of talent in a market and the quality of talent that emerges. And so I don't think it's necessarily that I see a difference in sensibilities, although I'm sure there is, and you see that from the British versus the American office and whatnot. But I just think that I want to play the most challenging gigs, and I feel like I've already reached loads of milestones for audiences that previously petrified me. Now it's quite rare that there's a gig in the UK where I have kind of butterflies or heart palpitations, and I love it when that does happen, but it happens more rarely these days because I'm just more prepared for them. Whereas I know if I went to America, if I was in these, legacy clubs where the greats have stood, I'd feel like I'm starting over again. And on the crowd work point, I agree. That's because the platforms promote those, and then comedians. Most comedians are actually pretty smart, savvy business people. They see the platforms are promoting it, so they provide them more. But I don't see it as a bad thing, because it's a gateway to comedy. And you're all into comedy, right? You all know the names of different comedy clubs. last night I was having a drink in a bar that was facing Ronnie Scott's, which is a famous jazz club, and I was with another comedian, and I reminded him that for most people, going to the Comedy Store is like us going to that jazz club. Oh, one day, wouldn't that be good to go to Ronnie Scott's and watch the jazz? You know what I mean? Like for most people, is one day I might go and watch the comedy. Most people have such an arm's length relationship with it. I actually think it's quite a good thing that the insider comedy clubs are appearing on people's phones, even if we'd prefer it to be better content. Yeah, obviously, because we love comedy. But most people don't give a. Most people in the UK have not even set foot inside a comedy club.
Yeah.
Right? We're all very niche loser nerds here.
Adam, you had a question.
Yes.
Well, I did also want to.
Now, Harry's got one more question. Then this is it. He means it this time.
What's a Japanese sense of humour?
Do you want to try?
Well, I think you said yourself you prefer not to sort of look into sort of national stereotypes. You're thinking about the way the joke is presented. You know, you've talked about a different format, manzai or rakugo, these different formats. So it's what people are used to, and then if you break that mould, then it's. I think this is why today is so interesting, that there's a much more fluid and global. I'm sort of avoiding answering that directly because I don't think it is.
But they are all jokes. You know,
Right.
if you think of every time a Japanese person laughs, it's still within this framework of there's a problem to solve. And one kind of advanced level joke writing technique I can offer, if you are lucky enough to speak a second language, try writing in that language, because it makes your jokes so much better. Because you just have to get the concepts spot on. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't get away with muddling through things. When I was doing stand-up in Japanese, just for fun, I did a couple of gigs in Paris in French. And I speak all right. You know, I did an A-level in French. I'm all right at French. But certainly, I'm not all right to deal with a heckler. And I'm not all right to, if I land on a punchline and they don't laugh, I wouldn't know what to do next. So I did it just to, feel something, right? to be nervous before a gig again. But it definitely made me really think about the material I was going to do. Right? Is this objectively funny, such that even if I completely muddle up the pronunciation, does the concept alone get them? Do you know what I mean?
I think, yeah, certainly there's, like you were saying, there's still the desire to sort of satirise like the social group or the office situation, or the same sort of dynamics, but it might be in a more specific, traditional to Japan, in the sense that the office scenario, the boss, has traditionally been a man sitting by a window, half asleep, while there's an office lady running around making all the tea. This is talking about the 80s or something. Changed, thankfully.
Yeah.
Adam, finally, you get a chance. Thanks for those questions, Harry.
Yeah, you've talked about challenging yourself, and you've said that you've gone to Paris. Do you feel like, because you haven't achieved a full, I don't know, you don't feel like you've fully matched that challenge? Do you still feel like you want to go there and finish what you started, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, so definitely I just like the process of going from 0 to 1 in a thing, right? I'll answer this question with a completely ridiculous thing. I advise any friends that are going through depression to learn to juggle, right? And the reason for that is everyone can learn to juggle in a week. 3 days, actually, with a bit of practice, right? And sometimes we just need reminding that, the world is malleable, our brains are malleable, things can change. And it kind of works, right? Just going from dropping the balls to that little eureka moment of, oh my God, I didn't drop that one, to being able to do a 3-ball cascade. It's just good for us to remind ourselves that we're creatures that can improve. And so, for me, the end goal is not go and do a special in French, but the goal is just keep that fluidity of thought, feel scared. Maybe this is not what you want to hear, but I don't have any I don't really have like a comedy bucket list. I know I've got colleagues who like, they really are like within 5 years it's Live at the Apollo, a sitcom within, you know, and they've mapped it all out, and sometimes it works for them. I, for now at least, I'm happy with like a reverse bucket list, right? That last year I was so lucky I got to do Jason Manford's tour support, and you know, obviously as a kid I go, well, it would be amazing to do that, but I'd never applied for it. You know, do you know, but in retrospect, I'm like, that is a real reverse bucket list item. How cool is that? So right now I'm in kind of reverse bucket list mode. I don't have any huge goals. I've got a couple of like, in the next couple of years, I'd like to take a couple of my shows to some bigger venues. I've got a couple of tour plans.
Yeah, do tell us. As we're coming towards the end of our time, do tell us where can we next see you when you get back from the cruise ship, unless we're all invited onto a quick cruise, but where can we see you when you come back?
So most of my gigs in the UK are kind of circuit gigs, so I'm at Top Secret in London fairly often. I am friends with Evan, who owns Creatures, and so I'm there as often as I can. If you're at the Edinburgh Fringe, I'm doing a brand new show called Let's Listen to Some of Lou Bega's Other Songs Together for an hour, where I will play some of Lou Bega's other songs and give my commentary. And I'll also do my concept show, The Most Toast, where in any given room, like someone in this room's eaten the most toast. We haven't got time to find out who, but I could. I suppose I could plug, I do my online MC workshop course. It's like a 4-hour course. It's £50, but there's a discounted £25 rate if you're unwaged. So if you're really keen to learn MCing, it's only really suitable if you've done comedy for a year or two. So it might not be for everyone, but I guess I could plug that. That's happening when I'm back from the cruise. And I think there's about 3 places left. I only do 12 in a session.
I think I definitely need to learn a bit of that, because before this we began, you were standing at the back waiting for it to begin, and I was like, well, we're just going to sit in the seats.
Just start.
Instead of saying, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite Ollie Horn to come down and hear. Anyway, but what I think we could do now is give Ollie a great big round of applause to say thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
It's been a real treat, Ollie. It's been really instructive and lovely. And thanks for mentioning all our soulful connections, Jack Gledo, Jason Manford, Joe Pasquale. We've got these connections. And it's a great that there's this network that you're beginning your work in as well. Keep in touch with us, those people who've come to Salford perhaps for the first time. And hopefully we'll have more meetings with Ollie. I'd love to invite you back to talk to students during our very dull sounding careers and professional pathway module. It's not half as exciting as the stories you've been telling us. Thanks everybody for your fantastic questions. Thanks Harry for multiple questions. Really pleased to hear what you're all getting on with. And thanks Bron for filming today. Right, that's
Thanks,
our
and stay in
time.
touch.
Stay in touch. Goodbye everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.